I had an inkling that Pretty in Pink was going to be kind of a big deal when because Breakfast Club opened right before we started into production on Pretty in Pink, and it was like it was huge. It was a massive hit.
Welcome back to Under Oath. Today on Under Oath, we have actor, producer Jon Cryer, who you might know from Pretty in Pink, 2.5 Men, and his new podcast, The Man Who Calculated Death. Jon, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Woo!
Now,
yes, all right.
You're a father, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am the most uncool dad in the world until yesterday.
Did I somehow take the trophy from you by being more uncool?
Let me make it clear. Today, I called my daughter up, and she's not interested in anything I'm doing. I'm a lawyer. I do stand-up. I have this show. And I said to her, guess who I get to interview tomorrow? And she goes, who? Now, her favorite movie is Pretty in Pink.
Oh, my goodness.
She's 19 years old. She's in a theater program in Florida. She goes, who do you get to interview? I go, and I just said the words. I said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to say the word Ducky. She lost
Ducky.
her mind. So you made me the cool dad for like 10 seconds in my life. So thank you very much for that.
Good. I'm so glad. Please give her my best. And I'm excited that she's pursuing theater. It's amazing time for theater, and we need more people in it all the time.
Yeah, live theater for me is just an amazing thing to be able to do. And you started your career off in live theater.
Oh yeah. Both my parents are actors. My mom's also a composer and a playwright, and I was around it my whole life growing up, and I loved it just mostly because the people in it were bonkers. They were very entertaining, and it was a fun atmosphere to be around. But by the time I was 12 or 13, I realized, oh no, I want to do this. I want to be a performer, and so I just started to try to get into. I went to a theater camp in upstate New York called Stage Door Manor, which is a great, amazing place for young people. And I went there, and then when I was 17 or 18, I started auditioning for parts. And the first thing I got was Matthew Broderick's understudy in Brighton Beach Memoirs.
How does that even happen? They just go, hey, listen, you look a little like him. You're a good actor. Let's see how this works out.
It's surprisingly similar to that process. No, what happened with Brighton Beach was, and it's a little bit circuitous. There was another show on Broadway that Matthew had also originally starred in called Torch Song Trilogy at the time, and that was a sort of breakthrough role for him. Once they saw him in that, they put in Brighton Beach Memoirs. Which was Neil Simon's big hit play. And so the way that things broke for me was I was literally walking down the street, and my mom ran into an old friend of hers who was an understudy in Torch Song Trilogy on Broadway. He said, oh, we're casting for the teenage son in that. And your son should audition for that. Jon should audition for that. And because the character was supposed to be 15 years old, they had to audition a lot of people who didn't have experience. They had to sort of throw open the doors to people. Most of the time you need a certain amount of experience just to audition. But they let me in, and once Brighton Beach heard that there was a kid who, because I walked on stage to audition for Torch Song Trilogy, and there was a gasp from the audience because Harvey Fierstein was in the audience, and the playwright, and he thought I looked so much like Matthew. He thought I was Matthew. So once word got out that there was this kid who looks incredibly like Matthew, was auditioning around, Brighton Beach wanted to see me. I auditioned for Brighton Beach the next day and got both parts on the same day. So I don't know if you meant to open up this Pandora's box of showbiz ridiculousness, but yeah, that's what happened.
I always think of how tough it is for people in this career, years and years of it's a transitory existence where you kind of like one job to the next job and the next job. And I mean, you go out of that, you go into No Small Affair, and, you start, then Pretty in Pink hits.
Yes. That was a bombshell. Yeah, I knew that I had an inkling that Pretty in Pink was going to be kind of a big deal when because Breakfast Club opened right before we started into production on Pretty in Pink, and it was like it was huge. It was a massive hit. And I thought, oh, okay, I guess there's going to be big expectations for the next one of these movies that comes down the road. And yeah, it turned out to be true. And I'm so glad that it has stood the test of time. That your daughter is finding finding
That
joy
must
in
that
it.
must be just unbelievably weird for you because, every time you show up, you don't know what people know you from.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's fine. Sometimes people, by the way, think they know me from high school, from actual high school, not movie high school. And it's like, well, no, that wasn't. I didn't go to school in Rhode Island. I'm from New York City, actually. um, but and a lot of the time, for the first part of my career, people thought I was Matthew Broderick, so I would get mistaken. It was like, "Hey, Ferris Bueller." I was like, "No, not Ferris Bueller." But now that he has a fabulous mane of white hair and I have zero hair, there's an easy way to tell us apart.
I like to think, everyone says people look like somebody else. That's always a thing. Everyone has a doppelganger. Everyone has this,
Yeah.
and, it obviously was helpful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great for me. It was great for me, and I liked him personally. I was his understudy for a while, and he was absolutely lovely guy. Unfortunately, very healthy. So there was never a day when I took over for him as an understudy. I did end up getting I left the show as an understudy for a while. They fired me. I got No Small Affair, and then they asked me to come back and take over the show after Matthew had left. So I did end up performing in the show, but it took a few months.
Now, as I said earlier, under oath, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for a ridiculous amount of year. And every time I read somebody, an actor, they're fascinated with criminal law or everything else. And I've done some big criminal cases. And I'm always interested in. Now, murder porn is a big thing right now. People love criminal podcasts and everything else like that.
Yep,
And you have
true
your own
crime.
podcast now. And I was looking at this with The Man Who Calculated Death. And it was fascinating at the same time because it's such a difficult topic.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh no. It's a huge epic story, and it's a World War II mystery, and that was one of the things that attracted me to it. And it's not technically a true crime story, but it involves some pretty awful dark stuff, and that does seem to be a fascination for people with podcasts. But I really got into it because it's a family story. I've worked I used to be co-host of a show called Undisclosed, which was about wrongful convictions, and so I have been a part of that, and obviously I loved like Serial and all the great true crime podcasts that have been around. But this was a story that kind of fell in my lap. A friend of my wife's, who's named Suzanne Rico, who's a local TV anchor here in Los Angeles. She sort of offhandedly she mentioned that she knew that I was a big fan of the space program. And I love the history of the Cold War and the history of World War II. And she sort of offhandedly mentioned that her grandfather worked on the space program. And I was like, oh, "What? That's amazing. Tell me all about it." And she said, "Yeah, and before that, he worked for Hitler. Would you like some milk with your coffee?" And I was like, "Wait,
Just
sorry."
off. He happened to do a little work with Hitler.
Yeah,
I mean,
Suzanne, can you back that up a little? What?
Yeah.
What? And it turns out her mother had passed away recently and left an unfinished memoir. And her mother's dying wish for Suzanne, because she knew Suzanne was a journalist, she said, "Can you finish my memoir?" And so Suzanne, this is a request of enormous weight for her. She spent the next 6 years investigating her family's history and discovered all kinds of. She knew her grandfather was a scientist in Germany. She knew he was an aircraft designer. She did not know that he was actually one of Hitler's most important scientists, and that he invented the V1, which was the vengeance weapon, or the first cruise missile, and which just revolutionized warfare. And he also, there was something, a tragedy that was looming over the family. His wife died mysteriously toward the end of the war, which was always a huge trauma for her mother. And so Suzanne took it upon herself to sort of solve this family mystery. And through the course of making the podcast, she actually did it. And that was the amazing thing for me as a producer, was we got into helping Suzanne craft this as a podcast. And, we have experience as producers and working a story, but she just kept looking. She kept investigating while we were doing this. So the story kept changing because we kept discovering new stuff. And then when she was actually able to put all the facts together, it was just an incredible light bulb moment.
Jeez, I actually just got into an argument with my assistant when we were talking about this podcast, because I read one of the quotes. And one of the quotes was, he wasn't a Nazi, he was a patriot. And I got into, and I haven't listened to it. And I was going, I'm sitting here and I'm Jewish, and maybe I take it a little more personal. I was like going, what? Because I've been over there, I've studied it a little bit. I'm going, there are a lot of people who put their heads down, and that happens in our country too when we don't want to look at something.
Oh, yeah.
And how tough is it for you to sell that as a podcast and go, hey, listen, I have this guy, he worked for this. Trust me, it's going to be good.
Well, that's the thing. In the end, the man who calculated death was a Nazi. So this is a story about a guy who was a Nazi. So it's dark. And what I think a thing that's very valuable in the story, the course of this story, is it's about what a family does to survive as their country falls to authoritarianism. He was a brilliant inventor. He was a pilot. He was a celebrity for being a pilot, like Charles Lindbergh. He was famous all over Europe for his exploits. He built the planes that he flew. He built them himself. And he considered himself a patriot. He wanted to build. The thing about Hitler is that the rise of Nazism in some respects was incremental. It was little things here and there, and it's not like just the first day that he's in power, there's tanks on every corner, and everybody knows, oh, authoritarianism has struck, and we're all racists now. And it didn't happen that way. It happened incredibly slowly. And that's what's, I think, incredibly valuable about this particular story, is that you see how a family that possessed no particular bigotry, not particularly nationalistic, but they're forced to make all these little choices as it goes along, just to live a normal life, just to, he had 5 kids. He felt, like he had to have the good job. He had to have the place. He made a lot of choices that a lot of people would have made in the same circumstances, but ended up helping one of the darkest, most evil regimes that has ever existed on Earth. And it's like, how does that happen? How does it, finding out how that happens was incredibly valuable to me. And at one point, Suzanne discovered that the V1s were actually built in a concentration camp. And she found a guy named Oscar Jacob, who was one of the men who worked on building her grandfather's bomb. And she has reached out to Oscar, and that's actually one of the most riveting parts of the podcast is that she journeyed to him to sort of try to convey how she could apologize for generations of her family.
I don't even know how you would.
Yeah, where do you begin?
You can't
where
even
do
say,
you begin?
I'm sorry what my grandfather did. I mean, there's just not,
Exactly.
That's not even in the card. You can't even think about trying to do something. You can try, and I'm sure he appreciated it. He just,
That's the thing. Episode is called Chamber 44, and listen to it. And it's one of this man, Oscar Jacob, is one of the most astonishing human beings I've ever come across. And you will, it's an astonishing conversation. Um, uh, and the that Suzanne was willing to go. This was a devastating thing for her to realize about her family, and realize that the people she knew were close to this. And there's the concept of the banality of evil, that we think the movies have created this thing that every bad guy is obviously a bad guy, and it's not that way. They're human beings that through the overwhelming combination of their choices end up either doing heroic things or doing awful things because the situation has gotten so desperate. What Hitler was a horrifying human being who had this genius for manipulation. Like one of the earliest things he did was before Kristallnacht, before all of that stuff was clear, he insisted that on his birthday, he made it a law that you had to put a red candle in the window on his birthday. You had to light a red candle in the window. And that's an easy thing to do. It's not expensive. It's just an easy little signifier. He wasn't asking a whole lot of people. But the people who didn't do it went on a list. And they were the first people rounded up when the roundups started. And that was he would use wedges to just wedge communities, wedge people apart. He made it easy to fall into line. It was just so much easier than the other things you could do. You could say, I don't want to, who are you to make me celebrate your birthday? F you, you could have done that and just not lit the thing. But then later on, there were consequences, and everybody just lived in that subtle fear. It was just easier to go along.
That's a tough thing to be able to do. I mean, when you don't have a choice, and we see this over and over again in our country, where in other countries where people think they're fighting wars for good reasons and they don't have a clue, and everyone doesn't understand history and everyone's got an opinion. And I just hope it's harder to pull something like that off again.
I hope so too. I really hope so too. History does repeat itself, and I think there are lessons to be learned. I am very I'm very hopeful that this particular story will resonate with people for that reason. But we have to make our own world, and we have to make the choices that the best choices we can make at the time.
Well, I can't tell you how great it is to talk to you. And also, I love the idea that you get to do more and more stuff that you love as your career progresses. And most people don't have those choices. And I love that you have those.
I love it. That is one of the things that's great about podcasting and about a lot of media now, is that it's easier for people to do by themselves so that they can make the art they love by themselves. Your daughter will be able to make her own movies. There was a movie called Tangerine that was, shot entirely on an iPhone. This is you can do it, and I love that people have more possibilities.
Well, this is such a pleasure, and I know it made my daughter ridiculously happy. It made me happy too. So look forward to talking to you again, Jon.
Oh, thank you. Have a great one.